the first meeting of like person and.
I'll sit there and listen and go.
Were you in the
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how many different students there. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's all from the.
There are people that you know tuning in.
Uh-oh.
There's Fred, and there's Steve Zucker,
Don't
and
tell me who's here.
okay, I won't.
I'll freak out.
And judging you.
Yeah, they'll be judging me.
Yeah, we have
Luckily,
it.
I'm near the end of my career twice, so I can't say anything really damaging anymore. Let's see, where is the charger here?
You can plug it into this. That looks.
Could you do that for me, please? Thank you. Power.
Start the video and we're already on 8 minutes of my face.
Okay.
If you want to use this computer, your PowerPoint would be on the Zoom.
That's fine. I can move it over, I suppose. How would I do that?
There's a mystery USB.
Infected with viruses, okay.
Yeah.
Really jacked.
And then. It must be actually in there. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I actually got one. They're doing it at home.
Okay.
Trying to figure out.
I mean, it is hard.
What that- Actually, we're trying to figure out what.
Yeah, I like that.
The mute, we got the video, we got the screen share. Cool, there's me. All right, everyone. I'm going to introduce LJ. LJ has 40 years of experience in exploration and mining. on 5 continents, beginning as a junior geologist for Derry, Mickner and Booth in 1979. He later worked as a miner and mine geologist, as chief mine geologist at the London mine and project geologist at Lahire for Kennecott. Subsequently, LJ worked as a consultant for a variety of companies, including Placer Dome and Orvana Resources. He has also worked as a project manager geologist and VP of exploration for several junior companies. While the preponderance of his experience is gold related, LJ also worked on silver, base metal, uranium, and industrial mineral projects. His exploration experience covers the spectrum from mine site to regional scale programs and includes the design, budgeting, and implementation of these programs. LJ has a master's in geology from Colorado State, a BS in geological engineering from Michigan Tech, and he's a certified professional geologist with AIPG and a QP under the NI 43-101. He's currently president of DREGS. And LJ and I worked together once upon a time. So
Indeed we did.
I'm glad he's here today.
Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. First off, I'd like to say it's a great honor to address the student SEG at Mines, and I'm looking forward to this. I'll also say that this will not be your typical uplifting early career talk. Apologies for that, but the world has changed since I started in this business, and I'm going to give you the straight poop. I'd also like to add that anything I say are my own opinions and thoughts. They do not represent any professional organizations with which I'm affiliated or any companies with which I have worked for, past, present, or future. So having dispensed with that, I would like to ask how many students here are from overseas, and it doesn't look like hardly anybody is. One, okay, normally I would have expected a larger contingent at Mines, but maybe COVID has changed that. That is somewhat germane in this talk because it's mostly a talk focused on geologists who will be doing actual on the ground, boots on the outcrop exploration, not so much people who would be going back to a home country to work for a quasi-national mining company or a large private company, or for that matter, those of you who may go to academia or government. So with that, this talk will address the real world of exploration with emphasis on overseas exploration. We'll start with an overview of where the industry is, where it might be going, and what you might expect to find when you start projects or work on projects overseas. And as soon as I learn how to use this slide projector, I will. Can you?
Yeah.
There we go. So starting with some overviews, the industry is in a bit of a crisis right now, and this is one example of it. We can see that we've had great success finding ore bodies, as this slide points out. 50% of all the discoveries have been found since '75. But there's clearly, in the recent decade, a precipitous decline in discoveries. And this coincides at a time when the world's population is growing more rich. Of course, we should look at richer when they hit about 2,500 a year in GDP. They want to buy microwaves and motor scooters and color TVs. Those all need metals. So this is an issue. We haven't done well for any commodities. This is gold. In spite of budgets being historically very, very high, we haven't had a major discovery for 3 years. This is in 2019. And even before that, discoveries had tapered off. Back in this time, that was perhaps the golden age of geology. We had a happy confluence of several factors, new technologies, such as heap leaching, RC drilling, the world opening up at the end of the Cold War, and we could work anywhere almost anywhere because of Pax Americana. And commodity prices were at or back for much of that time as well. And people were finding lots of ore bodies because there was an inventory of fairly shallow deposits to be found. Similarly, if we look at copper, discoveries in these pink bars, or the value of them plummeting, just like gold, exploration expenditures skyrocketing and then plummeting because, let's face it, who wants to invest in something that doesn't make money? So this is immediately important to you folks, because if no one's making money, they're not hiring geologists to look for things they can't make money on. That's sort of common sense, isn't it? Now, to put things in perspective, I like to look at the big picture and take an outside-in view to frame where we are. Here's a gentleman named Bernie Madoff. He was convicted of running a big Ponzi scheme. And you might think he made billions and billions of dollars, but it wasn't as much as you would have thought, perhaps, because in fact, they recovered 14 billion of the 17.5 that he took in. Now, granted, the investors thought their portfolios were worth 60 billion, so they felt pretty hosed, but it was only a minus 20% rate of return. In contrast, the mining industry has actually done worse. So Standard & Poor's, that same time frame of the copper graph, 2007 to 2016, the S&P returned a compound rate of return of 97%. US Treasury is about 30%. If you like gambling, you'd only lose 5. Madoff, minus 20. Investing in copper exploration, ooh. So one has to ask the hard question, what the heck are we doing here? If you lose this much money, why would anyone invest in it? Why would anyone choose this as a career? Well, let's take another look at this. Who's making the discoveries? Most of the discoveries in the old days were made by majors. That was when major mining companies had robust, deep exploration staffs. They used a lot of science. They had consistent budgeting year after year. You could have sustained, focused programs. They mentored young geologists, and me and most of my cohort were the beneficiaries of that old regime. But the bean counters at big companies figured out what that first graph showed, that we're not making any money at this. And so, as you'll find in your careers, exploration is always the first thing to go. So they outsourced their exploration to the junior sector, which was more nimble and dynamic. Big companies have a lot of bureaucracy. They took time to make a decision. A junior could rush into a new area, stake it up, drill out a shallow resource in Nevada, heap leach it, make some money, stock goes up, people get options, everyone gets rich, happy days, yeah. And that worked for quite a while. And that's why this graph looks like this, with this large green window of juniors doing more and more exploration and making more and more discoveries. Prospectors used to have some role, but with the changes in mining laws in the US, it's expensive for them to even exist and hold ground, so they're pretty much gone. There used to be companies called mid-tiers. They've been squeezed out as majors consolidate. Some become mid-tiers, some become juniors, or more likely just go extinct. So the whole dynamic of the industry has changed. So now if you jump into the industry, sadly, many young geos won't have the benefit of this mentoring and training that they once received at the hands of the majors. So why are we failing? Well, I think there's two main reasons. One is the physical and real world constraints. And the second is the failings of explorationists in general and juniors in particular. And there's good reasons for that. Physical and real world constraints. This is a graph that I love from the SCG newsletter, and it shows the depths of discoveries on the y-axis, the date of discovery on the x-axis, with brownfields and greenfield discoveries. And you'll notice that throughout all time, and we could go back much further in time, 95% of all discoveries are right here at the surface or just below the surface. Very few deeper. And there's a good reason for this. It's hard to find things when they're deeply buried. It's expensive to find things when they're deeply buried. Anybody who's worked on an exploration project or is a mine geologist knows how easy it is to hide an ore body and how expensive it can be drilling deep holes to find them. So very quickly, you can blunt your pick looking for deep things here, drilling some nebulous geophysical target. So our exploration tools aren't quite as good as we think. They're much better than they used to be, but they're still pretty fuzzy. And now we have a political headwind where mining is actually forbidden in much of the Western world. So for example, here in Colorado, we have a perfectly good molybdenum deposit at Mount Emmons, but we can't do anything with it. Instead, we will mine that overseas, that moly. So here's an example from Nevada, and my apologies if this is difficult to read. Please stop me if you can't. This is from Reed et al. They generously allowed me to share these slides. They gave a presentation on this in March of this year on GSN. The whole talk is on the GSN website, I believe, and I'd recommend that anyone doing this work looks at this talk. It's a great piece of work. So we go by decade in the state of Nevada looking at discoveries, 50s to 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. You can clearly see the golden age started in the 70s, through the 80s and 90s, and then starts falling off in the 2000s. And this is largely because we had models developed by Livermore and people like him about what we're looking for, new deposit types that were unrecognized, the new technologies I've referenced, a favorable political jurisdiction that allowed mining and even encouraged it, and lots of shallow places to explore, lots of shallow ore bodies to be found. That was just geologic serendipity. But the result was a boom in gold mining, which made the US, I think, number 2 or 3 in gold mining in the world for a while. I believe we've dropped to number 4 now, but it's all because of Nevada, really. But then as that shallow inventory becomes exhausted, we see fewer and fewer and fewer discoveries. Things get tougher, and regulations and permitting have become much tougher. So delays to projects also have a great disincentive to companies to do any work. Moving on with the same paper. Let me get that out of the way, okay. With time, this says or shows what I just said, time, percent of discoveries that were found that were buried. Very few in the early days, and now almost all of them are deeply buried. So some of you and many in the audience will know that drilling 1,000-foot holes is now common. Drilling 1,000-meter holes is not uncommon, and that's what is finding these things. Well, who can do that? Well, in Nevada, it's the big companies because juniors don't have the wherewithal. So even though globally, juniors are making most of the discoveries, in mature terrains where things are more deeply buried, you need deep pockets behind you, and you need a sustained program that can build on knowledge year after year and a stable staffing situation. Other than that, if you just go in and drill a couple of 1,000-foot holes, your chances of success are lottery ticket realm. And regarding our tools that aren't as good as we think, things haven't changed too much in the last 500 or 600 years. Here's a wood cutting from De Re Metallica, published in 1556. Here we see 2 geophysicists. There's one there, and one here holding twigs. And there's a geologist doing the real work in a trench. There's a CEO and an HR person pointing out what people are doing wrong. And that's more or less how things work today as well. If we look at our methodologies and what success is attributed to, it's changed quite a bit over time. And this is interesting to explore with some detail. Prospectors used to find a lot of stuff back in the 100 years ago because shallow deposits were out there to be found by a guy with a burrow and a pick and a gold pan and access to an assay lab. Extrapolation from known ore has always been a number 2 or number 1 contender. It's always easier if you're a known operating mine to follow that vein, look for the offset, find the next intersection. You've already got the tiger by the tail, so you can chase that to ground. Geophysics, of course, comes to its fore after World War II and seems to consistently be credited with about 20% of discoveries, maybe a bit less. Similarly, geochemistry, which the Russians really pioneered back here in the 30s and deserve a lot of credit for, is an extremely useful tool. And so they've played a large role in covered terrain and finding ore bodies that have subtle geochemical anomalies or don't have literally outcropping or at the surface, or sometimes they do, but they were not particularly obvious, like Carlin deposits, for example. But what we see also here is a dearth of new discoveries. We're offsetting known ore for what is that, perhaps over 50%, perhaps 60% of all discoveries. So greenfields discoveries are declining precipitously. So some examples of shallow ore, and this is what used to find all the big ones. And by the way, everything I talk about in this talk is from firsthand experience, not secondhand. So I could go on and drone on for several days if I pulled in 2 or 3 degrees of separation. So this is the Leonard deposit, or rather a small part of it. That's the Pacific Ocean there in the lower right. This is a red-brown silicified hydrothermal breccia. It sticks up out of the ocean to a height of over 50, maybe 100 meters. It was a navigational landmark for shipping. That's how obvious it was. It was on Australian topographic maps as red cliffs. Rumor has it, I believe it's a true story, that Gavin Thomas looked at that map, saw the red cliffs, pointed to them and said to his geologists, look at that. If you sample this, you'll get X grams per ton. I don't know what the actual grade is. When I was there, we had 1 drill hole and some chip channels, but it's probably gone through the mill by now. We were using it for riprap to build a road in the ocean because it was nice hard material, and that's the only time I built a road out of 4-gram rock. Down here's Don Mario. Similarly, it is not subtle. It's a metal kill, a hill of calcilicate. If you fly close enough to it, you can see the blue and the green on the rocks. The Jesuits actually knew about this in the 1500s, and then it was lost. It was a navigational landmark for bush pilots for decades. And it was only discovered when a logger cut a road out here to harvest the virgin forest. And one of the loggers brought a green rock into a geologist in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. He asked the geologist, is this interesting? I imagine the conversation went something like, I don't know, maybe. Where's it from? So quickly that was pegged. This was drilled out and went through several companies before I worked on it. It has had about 500,000 ounces, almost 3/4 of an ounce. It was a beautiful ore deposit, probably an IOCG. And it's all gone through the mill now. Maybe this upper part's still being mined, but it was an underground mine. Nothing subtle about either of those discoveries, nothing fancy about their discovery either. You just had to be there in the bush to find them. Exploration failings, why? Well, exploration by well-funded companies has been abdicated. They've farmed it out to the juniors as a high-risk business that they don't want any part of, but they're happy to swoop in and JV with a junior or buy them out when the junior's made a bona fide discovery, which is rare. The inability of juniors to be effective because they don't have the deep budgets. The typical junior program has been to raise a few $1,000,000, have a drill program on a shallow target, get lucky, have a 10-banger on your stock, cash in your options, sell the property, and happy days, we all get rich and go home. But juniors have deeper problems. Forbes magazine had an article on juniors several decades ago that stated they were the worst managed companies in the world. I can attest from personal experience that that's probably true. Not that I have a lot of other experience to compare them to objectively, but you'll see why. So you have incompetent management in juniors, you have crooks in juniors, and even good, well-run juniors face a very steep uphill battle because they face the dilemma of gambler's ruin, where you can make a bet on the roulette wheel, oh, we win. But the house odds are against you. So if you keep gambling, you will go broke. So should you become an exploration geologist? We're going to change gears now a little bit, now that I've cheered you all up about your future. It's not a job, it's a lifestyle. You're going to spend lots of time away from home in difficult, unpleasant environments, living in less than 5-star accommodation. Although I have to say that the people you work with are great. I personally love working with these, I call them peasants because many of them are, but they're great people, most of them. That was a great experience. I don't think I would have changed it. Mining has a boom and bust cycle. One of those first slides you saw, the very sawtooth pattern of discoveries, that's tied to commodity cycles in general. When things are bad, the geo staff is the first thing to go. You will be fired. You better have a plan B and a plan C. There's no retirement and the benefits are lousy. So, but being employed by a junior is actually great, in my view, because you have a lot more latitude and freedom of action than you would with a big company. You're the boots on the ground. You're the only person you're reporting up to in the field. You have a portfolio of do this, explore this 10,000 hectares or this prospect. And generally in the past, you were able to pretty much do as you pleased, as long as you did effective work and didn't cause a train wreck. So you couldn't do that in a big company, not anymore. In the old days, you could to some degree, but not anymore. So that's great, until it isn't. When the company runs out of money or whatever, you get fired for some reason. So as I mentioned, there's insufficient funding for juniors to have sustained programs. And this is getting more difficult all the time. I talk to a lot of friends that I have in the executive suites and juniors, and they always lament, have for years, but it's worse now, about how much time they have to spend just talking to shareholders and raising money. So that's one bad side of your career. If you are successful, you'll stop being a geologist, you'll become an executive and do jobs that you hate. Or maybe not. So here's some examples of incompetent management. These are hard to believe, but a lot of times your executives, CEO, whatever, has no experience in mining, no technical background. I've even seen CEOs that do not even have a college degree, shocking as that may be. I've seen people come out of the cannabis, online porn, crypto spaces, and even unsavory things like real estate development and appliance sales. So let us say that these people don't know what they're doing. Now, that's not to say that many of them aren't very smart people, and many of them have much, much more money than I do. So they know what to do, know how to do something right, but they don't have a sense for the business. And because of that, they can read a few books and articles about mining and exploration. And there's a cognitive bias. I would recommend to all you students and young professionals that you read a lot of books by Kahneman, Tversky, and others who've written about cognitive biases in recent decades, and behavioral economists, and folks like the ones that produce Freakonomics. We make all kinds of mistakes by not thinking things through clearly, by being blindsided by our own biases, bigotries, assumptions, and it causes a lot of harm. One of those biases is called the illusion of technical competency, or the illusion of competency. And a lot of these CEOs from outside the industry possess this. You can read a book, think, oh, I got this. I understand 80% of it, you think, but you really don't. So I've seen people pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for dog prospects against their advice to the geologist because they were starry-eyed about it. I've seen that twice. I saw one project sold for $1 million on an outcrop in 5 minutes because the owner told the CEO, this is gone if you don't do the deal today. It looked kind of sexy at first blush. There was some high grade, but hasty decisions are bad decisions. Don't ever be forced into making a snap decision. If your girlfriend says we get married now or I'm leaving you, let her go. You won't regret it. Or women for your future husbands or whomever, to be politically correct about this. I've seen people be paid 6 figures and generous stock options without the prospect ever being visited. In this case, I did visit the prospect subsequently, found out the assays were bogus and it was a dog. Selling shares for bullion that will be reproduced in the future. That's probably just outright fraud. Purchasing a project on a one-day visit without consulting the board. I saw this happen. It was a good project, a great project. It probably should have been purchased, but it didn't align with the company's objectives. Eventually, everybody got fired because of that. Mindlessly staking open ground next to a hot play. You'll see this, saw it a lot. Brex was a famous one. I remember talking to stockbrokers in a bar. When have you never heard anything in a bar that wasn't true? And they were saying, we have a property on trend with Bre-X. Well, for those of you who don't know what Bre-X is, it was a huge stock fraud in Indonesia. There's a movie called Gold that was based on it and some books written about it. I'd highly recommend you read them. True story, and it's not uncommon, unfortunately. Building a mill before you have an ore body, I've seen that happen 5 times, unbelievably. For some reason, investors at least used to think this was a good idea. It's never worked out. None of those mills ever paid for themselves, and some were torn down. If you see the staff having a turnover of 100% per year, seen that a couple times, there's a problem. Technical incompetence. Some of these might be honest mistakes, but using a lab that is not ISO certified, some guy's garage, who knows what. Now, as I talk about these places, I'm not going to name countries, I'm not going to name individuals, I'm not going to name companies, mainly to protect the guilty and innocent and to keep from being sued. But I've seen that happen on 3 continents. Strike sampling, where 18 meters of half an ounce turns into 1/8 of an inch of half an ounce, and similar things. High grading, where a narrow vein is suddenly made into a bulk tonnage ore body. I've seen those things several times each. Corrupt management, criminals, warning signs. The president will actually emphasize his lack of technical expertise. This is plausible deniability. This was something the CIA loved to do. Your president was assassinated? We're shocked, I tell you, shocked. We have no idea. So you'll hear that more than once. Overly complicated business schemes. Mining is already really complicated. And you used to start throwing other schemes on top of it, wrapping it in crypto or whatever. It just makes it worse. I mean, I have heard of one outfit that's supposedly launching a cryptocurrency backed by their supposed reserves. And I thought to myself, well, you could take a dog turd and wrap it in a cabbage leaf and call it a Tootsie Roll. It will be soft and chewy, but you won't like the way it tastes. Executives will not communicate by email, only verbally. That's a red flag. Why don't they want anything in writing? Corrupt management, warning signs. Well, about 1% of the population are psychopaths and 4% of executives are supposedly. So some of these guys are going to be your boss. That's just statistically a fact if you look at how many are out there. I had a boss get angry with me when I collected too many samples that didn't have gold in them. Now, if you're trained, you know that you collect lots of samples. You almost cannot collect too many samples. And if you don't have a lot of duds, it means you're not collecting enough samples. They didn't understand it. It didn't look good for their stock promotion. You see them spending money on lifestyle expenses. I've seen 2 condos in ski towns bought, condos in beachfront resorts, Armani suits, Match.com accounts, Napster accounts. Fancy cars are a big one. It goes on and on, you'd be shocked. You don't get paid on time, or not at all. That's kind of obvious. You should leave. They have impressive credentials on the board or in the executives. Don't be taken in by that. Usually these folks are legit, but I've seen some people that you look at the resume and you go, my God, this guy's gold plated. And you look at the results of the company and what they've told shareholders and you are appalled. And frauds everywhere. I've seen it on every continent, every culture, and every major religion. Don't believe that anybody anywhere is immune from it. Now, getting back to the honest people, gamblers ruin, even well-run juniors, and there are a lot of them out there, some great people, and these are the best companies in the world to work for, in my opinion. Even they have a terrible job of this. And it's because the range of odds for finding an ore body is between 1 and 10,000 to 1, 1,000 to 10,000 to 1. Now that's a squishy number. I've seen it as low as about 100 to 1 in an SCG article several decades ago when we had this plethora of shallow deposits to find. But more recent statements and you can dig them up in the literature, are 1,000 to 10,000 to 1 from a prospect to an ore body. Well, define prospect. Is that one little pit? Is it 100 square mile concession? I don't know. But if you look at the number of mines that are found every year compared to the number of projects, and my own personal experience seems to square with those odds, particularly nowadays in the last decade. And even most professionals don't realize how bad these odds are. Non-professionals certainly don't. That's why they can still sell penny stocks, although not as well as they used to. And that was also the result of cognitive biases. We're overconfident. A good exploration geologist had better be an optimist, or he will never find anything. I think there's some movie that there's a line about some guy asking never to be told the odds. So that might lead to overconfidence. Not necessarily a bad thing. It gives us the drive and focus to ignore all the downsides. There's something called survivorship bias and publication bias that we've all been victims of. In World War II, the US Army Air Force wanted to know why planes weren't coming back as much as they ought to. So they hired an engineer to examine all these bombers that came back and write a report about why they were damaged and what we could do to improve their survivability. Well, if you stop and think about that for a moment, what about the ones that didn't come back? Why didn't they survive? He didn't know because they're not there. Well, similarly, if you go to a mining conference or your classes or talks, no one talks about their abject failures and humiliations. They talk about, we found this, isn't this great? This geochemical method, these isotopes found that. You never hear about the negative news. Outside in view would say, well, look at the whole global pile of projects, which ones failed and why. No one ever talks about that, hardly ever. I saw one talk at PDAC several years ago where someone did. I don't remember the details, and if I did, I wouldn't mention them specifically, but it was a large, I will say it was a large Canadian company who was successful and had a huge mine. And they thought, aha, we have airplanes, we have magnetometers, we have airborne EM, we have geochem, we have these beautiful regional maps where prospective terrains have been identified. We got this. They flew zillions of line kilometers of geophysics, took zillions of samples on the ground, mapped, sampled, drilled, found almost nothing. Big sustained program, best people in the world doing it, geophysicists, geologists, geochemists. So that's scary. Publication bias is similar. Nobody ever publishes a paper that is, oh yeah, we knew that. It has to be something counterfactual, something interesting, something with a hook, and possibly something that's not representative. So as a professional, as a student, you get fed a lot of one-sided information that's difficult to balance against the real world. Then there's a sunk cost fallacy. We're all subject to this as human beings. It's a famous one. You spend 10 bucks on something that breaks, you think, well, it only cost me 5 more to fix it. Spend 5 more, oh, something else broke, I gotta spend 5 more. Pretty soon you're 100 bucks in the hole. This happens with mineral properties as well. I've seen millions of dollars spent on projects that after I sampled them the first time, hey, these numbers don't hold up, guys, we should just walk. Nope, we're gonna persevere and drill it. You wouldn't have done that in the first place if you had that original data in the correct form. As a geologist, you'll be looking at a lot of submittals, probably. Do not believe anything from anybody. Just believe that everyone's a liar. Don't say that to them, of course, give them the benefit of the doubt, but prospectors are famous for exaggerating, some even lie. Some of them, though, actually lead you to discoveries like Don Mario. I always make time for prospectors. If I'm in a second or third world camp, bush camp, and some guy wanders out of the woods with a rock, I give him all the time I have. He says, want to see where it came from? You bet. We go out there, we look at it. Okay, well, thank you so much. You buy him a beer and a lunch and send him on his way because it's not really worth a warm bucket of spit. But you didn't waste your time. You made a local contact, that's intel. You saw some new geology. You have a better geologic idea of your environment. That's going to make you more effective. And you never know, you just might be the one. So you always listen to those guys. Government reports are not immune. I've never seen a bad report from a first world country that's misleading, but I have seen them from a number of geological surveys from foreign countries that have outright falsified assays in them. So just because the report has an imprimatur of a government entity doesn't mean that you should believe it. You always have to take your own samples and do your due diligence. Falsified assay sheets. Oh boy, that's a common one. My favorite was in Mesoamerica. There was a mining contractor. He was definitely legit. He had a staff of dozens. He had millions of dollars of expensive yellow painted underground mining equipment, jumbos, LHDs, the whole 9 yards. He had a contract in a major underground mine. You talked to him. Wow, this guy, totally solid, right? Hey, I've got this prospect. Okay. Gives us the report, gives us the assay sheet. Report shows these nice silicified outcrops in the woods. Okay, that looks credible. He's got a geologist who wrote it. Okay. The assay sheet was spectacular. Multi-gram gold assays, kilogram silver assays. Holy crap. All right, so this bothers me because it looks too good to be true. So we look at those assays and look at the geochem. Boy, could be a bonanza epithermal thing, you know, like the Comstock, where you did have coincident bonanza gold and silver. Those are very rare, but could be. So after 2 days of looking at that assay sheet and reading the report and thinking about this, we noticed on the ICP columns, the silver values were less than 10. Well, they should have been over limits. So that was just a fraud. To boot, the silicified outcrops, you know, the Spanish would have found those with grades like that. So even a completely legitimate looking vendor can be a con man. Don't believe anybody. Do your own work. Maps misrepresenting deposit size. It's pretty common to see little veins turned into stockworks, turned into porphyry systems. Need to look at the project. You can't duplicate the sample values. That's kind of a no-brainer. Employing innovative extraction technology, the magic sauce in the assay flux. That's a famous one. I've seen people say they have a new way to get sulfur out of volcanoes that removes the heavy elements. They took a bunch of people for a whole bunch of money in a foreign country and skipped town. They seem credible. They look you right in the eye and lie. Seeing more capital spent on a project than the resource could possibly justify. That's not uncommon either. I've seen it a few times. Big mill, lots of equipment, new shiny equipment. You look at the resource. One of these prospects had been placer mined on the surface, so it had been hydraulic off to the bedrock. And then this little beautiful exposed flower structure of veins had been high graded down to a depth of maybe 10 meters, where you can get it with a backhoe or a ladder. But very quickly from that, you can see, well, absolutely, there's no more than a few thousand tons here. Equipment was worth many, many millions. Probably these are money laundering operations because cocaine's hard to hide in bank accounts and laundromats. When you're examining an old mine, this was taught to me by an old school mines professor many decades ago. Imagine what that mine was like when it was intact, if you knew all that information today, and would you still pick it up? Most times the answer is no. If you drive up I-70 here west of town and look at all these little mines and dog holes on the sides of the road, most of them never made money. Many of them were actual frauds, but naive investors, unseasoned geologists might look at that and go, who would put all that time and effort into something that was obviously not worth money? Be surprised. Environmental, social, and governance. This is a big deal now, and it's difficult for juniors to manage this effectively. The demands have exploded so largely, so big onto dealing with the local communities, NGOs, governments, complicated laws and environmental rules and permitting, that it's really taxing on your exploration group. and it's beyond their ability to really manage well. My friend here is helping me with my rock hammer. He's my field assistant. He actually works in the pharmaceutical industry. So large companies make a lot out of this, and rightly so. If you get offside with the locals, you'll kill the project. I've seen it happen more than once. So they are dead right to take this with the utmost seriousness. It's not a trivial topic at all. When you meet some people out in the bush, you think, wow, these guys haven't been to school. They don't look real bright. And some of these guys are sharp as a barrel of tacks. Never underestimate the locals. They're probably as smart as you are, maybe smarter. They're often pretty sophisticated. Some communities are just difficult to work with. Maybe they've been the victims of genocide or historical discrimination or yada, yada, yada. So they have some deeply rooted issues that you may not be able to overcome. And you just have to manage each one on its own merits and deal with it on the fly. Unassuming individuals, they might be key power brokers. The old lady who goes speeding by in your pickup truck and shower with rocks might be the matriarch of the most powerful clan in the area. Bad move. Be nice. Everyone has the internet. I remember one project where a local guy who's a bit of an activist goes online, sees the website of the company. Wow, these guys have $1 zillion deposit on our little village. We want more. The CEO, juniors are in a tough spot here. They need sexy press releases to hype the stock and raise money. So they do that in press releases, but everyone reads those now. 40 years ago, they wouldn't have gotten out of North America, Australia, Europe. 20 years ago, it was difficult. Now, the world's at everyone's fingertips. Trying to throw money at a project to advance it for social issues and buy people off usually backfires. It only leads to escalating demands and may have unintended consequences. In one area, they were throwing money at the community to get them to permit drilling, and that escalated. That was still a bearable burden because it was a relatively small part of the drill budget, but it pissed off everyone else that wasn't in that community because it raised the local wage scale. So suddenly, other farmers, businessmen, lumber mills, other mines couldn't afford workers. They made enemies of most of the people in the area. Always show deference to local customs. They may not be what you're used to, but you have to bite your tongue and stand back sometimes. The necro-cannibalism was the most interesting excuse I ever heard for someone missing work. And prepare yourself, read tourist guides, history books, try to learn the language, get a dictionary. Showing even some effort to communicate with people in their own language makes a big difference. And that really is important when you're engaged with a local community and relying on prospectors and locals for the good graces and permission for access. That's pretty key. Health and safety challenges. Wear your seatbelt. I used to go to Rose Medical Center. I still do. When I go to a new area for a medical exam and to find out what I need there, if it's anti-malarial drugs, what the baddies are for diseases, et cetera, et cetera. My first doctor there was Dr. Mostow, who sadly died. But he said, vehicles are the biggest killer. And this is true. I found that out from experience. I know 4 people and 2 dogs that have died from that, tragically. Sometimes it's bad drivers. It's usually bad drivers. If you have a driver who's incompetent, get him fired, take the wheel away from him, whatever you have to do, don't put yourself at risk. Sometimes that's difficult to do. Sometimes, usually they drive too fast or just unskilled. Sometimes you'll have someone that's incompetent and they don't even know how to drive very well, and they won't tell you that. Because in most parts of the world, you have a hierarchical society and one just doesn't criticize the boss. They don't give the boss bad news. Even if it's solicited, it will be difficult to extract. So sometimes you only find out the hard way that the driver doesn't really know how to drive, even though he told you he did. Plane wrecks give a good example of that. If you look at plane tragedies over the decades, those that happen, the greatest number from pilot error are those that happen in jurisdictions of that hierarchical society. And it was attributed to the co-pilot just not piping up about, oh, Boss, you see that mountain over there? You don't question the boss. Light planes and helicopters, issues, a lot of light push planes don't have good maintenance or well maintained. Larger companies are very good about this. They'll go in and do an audit of their safety and maintenance procedures. If you're just out on your own with a junior, you hop in the nearest military transport or air taxi and off you go. And usually they're all right, but you never know. Helicopters, they kill a lot of people. Crashes are the biggie. Sometimes someone walks into a tail rotor. That's not a good thing. In New Guinea, they call those mixed master belonging to Jesus Christ. Diseases, we make a lot of these things and they are a big deal, but they're not as big a deal as airplanes and especially vehicles, but you need to be cognizant of it and take precautions. I've caught all those things there on the list and a few more, but I bounce back. Food poisoning, yep, it happens. But I've only had it a couple times, really. And Montezuma's revenge is more common, so you take some antidiarrheals with you. Now that we have bottled water, this is much diminished. You know, drinking dirty water, if you do some good planning, is really not an excuse anymore. Some jurisdictions are rather dodgy, many of them. If you're not careful and you're in a city, someone might try to entrap you or drug a drink. So this has happened to me twice with the entrapment. I wasn't entrapped because I grew up in Detroit and I knew I got some street smarts. So you could see it coming that this sleazy black guy here trying to sell you hard drugs. Something's fishy here, or that girl that's showing way too much interest in you. No, no thanks. Drug drinks, that happened to me once. And I was with another geologist, and I have a rule when I'm overseas, I never drink anything that doesn't have a bottle cap on it. If I go out on the town, bottled beer, or usually just bottled water, because I want my wits about me. Never a drink with ice, a cocktail mixed at a bar. Those are too easy to put Mickeys in. I know of one guy who woke up without money in pants. That wasn't my story. But me and the other geo had this, I broke my rule because I was in an expat bar talking to an educated man who was a college professor, purportedly middle-aged, very well-spoken, perfect English. Let's have some scotch. Okay, we get a bottle of scotch and we get a little bit tuned. He was not a college professor, or if he was working for some intelligence services. So again, trust no one. Robbery and assault. Never take anything that you would not want to lose. So I've been robbed a couple times, but it was no big deal because it wasn't family heirlooms or expensive jewelry, not that I have any. But robbery happens frequently. One red flag is if someone comes up to you in a foreign country that you don't know, who speaks perfect English and starts to be your friend and wants to help you, walk away. He's probably not your friend. Assault. Some jurisdictions are just dangerous. Well, robbery also, I've seen pickup trucks get stolen out of gated walled lots that have security guards, cameras, no one knows nothing. I've seen safes chisel out of walls, no one knows nothing. Obviously, there's an inside job there, but you'll never get to the bottom of it. So be careful what you have that might be stolen. Assume everything you have down there will be stolen. Assaults and other worse things, that sadly, this seems to be more of a common problem than it was in the past. I've had several people I know get mugged and need stitches and have everything stolen, including passports, trucks, and computers. One, they tried to carjack him, put a few bullet holes in the front of the car and then a few in the back as he sped away. A few more stories I won't go into. So if you're out and about, don't go out at night. Don't go driving at night in some places. I shouldn't make you too terrified. Most places are safe, but you really need to know what parts of the country you're working in are dangerous, or there might be guerrillas or a lot of narco activity. You need to have real good street smarts. Pay attention to your situation. Have some situational awareness. Are those people eyeing me over there? Do they look angry? Am I alone all of a sudden? What's going on here? Don't put yourself in those situations. Drugs and alcohol. Some people have issues. I've had 3 people die from these issues. This is never a good thing. 2 were geos. One had a cocaine issue, and that killed him. One had an alcohol issue, and that was particularly tragic because he had a wife and a couple of children, and he bought some bad street alcohol. It was dirt cheap, but it was not the good kind of alcohol, and it killed him. And it killed the young lady he was with. Tragically, the young lady's body was never even claimed. So there's some widows and orphans from that. And I had a driller who had another white powder issue. So that made a mess of things for a couple of days. Drillers can be particular problems in this regard. Naturally, it goes without saying that you do not want to do this as professionals for one, and responsible adults on the other. And if you do get busted for drugs in some of these jurisdictions and you call the US Embassy after you get your go to jail card, they will say, drugs, good luck with that, click. Foreign prisons are not good places. Continued, we're driving up the road one time and looked in the back of the truck. We had the powder, the caps, and some heavy metal hose fittings in one box. What could go wrong on a bumpy mountain road? So we had an impromptu safety meeting about storage of explosives. Another time I caught one of our workers crimping blasting caps with his teeth. I don't know how much of some of you know what a blasting cap is, but it's a small device that sometimes a percussion will set off. It's basically like a big firecracker. If it goes off in your mouth, that's not a good thing. We had to find some crippers and teach them how to use that. Some places were war zones, and you have to be really careful there. I had a friend in one jurisdiction, he said to his local workers who were communist guerrillas in another life, "Donde están las minas? Where are the mines?" They spent 2 or 3 days looking for old Spanish mines, and finally he said, "Where are the old Spanish mines?" "Oh, we thought you meant landmines." There's one. Another time I was in a place, we heard some guys speaking English. As you're a geo doing work, if it's Nevada or overseas, when you hear someone gossiping or talking in hushed tones at the next table at the restaurant, you go, what are they saying? Well, in this place, the 2 people look like gringos. Sounds like English. So I walk over, introduce myself. "Who are you guys?" Blah, blah, blah. "We're ex-military working for the UN, helping the country clear landmines." "Oh, that's cool. What are you doing?" they asked me. "Recon geology, and normally we'll stop at a bridge, get in the creek, take some stream seds, walk up the river, do some mapping, take some rock samples." Their eyes got very big. I said, "Stop doing that." "Why?" "Bridges are prime ambush sites. The guerrillas would set up a machine gun and a mortar on those and to put landmines all over the bridge sides, because when the ambush starts and the soldiers dismount, they run into the gully where the landmines are." We changed our sampling protocol after that. Corrupt police, lots of jurisdictions they'll pull you over. This is particularly common on Friday or Saturday night, looking for some party money. Never carry all your money on you, hide it, bury it in your luggage where it's inaccessible, but have some bribe money in your pocket. 20, 40 bucks. If you flash them 100, they'll take the 100. You won't talk them down from that. And that's usually where it ends. The local economy might have narcos, mafias, warlords. You either get along with them or you leave. There's no middle ground. Oftentimes, you can reach an accommodation with them. Oftentimes, they don't really care what you're doing as long as you stay out of their business. But you better know that they're there. And this is where knowing the locals, hiring everybody in the local village to dig trenches, to take samples, to help you in the field goes miles. They want the jobs usually, they want your money, and they'll keep you out of trouble because they don't want to see their paycheck disappear. Sometimes people you work with are shot or disappeared. A couple of places I've worked, the national geologist that we used to engage with as a liaison, I don't know where he went. They're gone. I had in this picture, this gentleman in the middle is my foreman on this project. He had a wife and 3 children. He disappeared. I was a widow and 3 orphans. His father was murdered in his bathroom in his own home. He's a fine old man. I lived in that home. They were my rental in that village for this project. His mother would cook me dinner and breakfast and make my lunches. They were just beautiful, salty earth people, and they were murdered by narcos. So anyone who tells you that drug use is a victimless crime doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. The externalities from it in the other parts of the world are tremendous. Financial and lifestyle considerations. Here's Frank Azar, famous attorney in Denver. If you get in a car wreck, shout out to him for permission to use this. Account of, I can't see what that's, career stability. Well, there is none. Need a plan B and C, we mentioned that. I've changed careers twice. I've become a software engineer for Quest. That was for 4 years, I believe, and a geosteering engineer in Texas. Changing careers is hard. It's just like getting your master's or PhD. You have to go back to school and you start over at the bottom, which is, you do what you got to do to pay the mortgage. Will you be paid? Well, I've only been stiffed 4 times. A good friend of mine mentioned that you always plan on the last paycheck bouncing. And so you want to keep that cushion in the bank so you can cover those contingencies when they happen. The first 2 times I let it go. I was young and stupid. The last 2 times more money was involved. I had become old and cantankerous. So I sued them. And I chased one client across 2 jurisdictions with 2 sets of attorneys and ran them to ground finally. But even if you win, you don't win all the way. You'll settle out of court probably, sign an agreement not to ever mention it again, and maybe get 30 or 40 cents on the dollar after the attorneys get a third of the money. Stock options used to be a way to get rich back in the good old days when ore bodies were plentiful and shallow. Don't plan on them. I can count on one hand the number of people I've met that have gotten rich on them. Some though have made some serious coin. You'll have a high divorce rate. Just because you're not around, spouses tend to get angry about that. Your children may grow up feral. And things break in the house. So when you come home, there'll be lots of things to do. So you still want to be a geologist. I know this has been pretty uplifting to date, but really you have to have a passion for exploration and geology. If you don't have one, the career path won't sustain you. This is not a rational choice for most people. You have to have a tolerance for risk, situational awareness. I think they're manageable risks. I was told once that it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. I don't know if that's really true. There's no stats on it because we have a very small number of people doing this. But I do know a lot of dead people. So maybe it is. But I feel that if you're heads up and proactive, you can avoid being in most dangerous situations and manage your way out of the few you might find yourself in usually. I've only really felt seriously threatened once or twice. So for me, it's difficult to see how the industry is going to escape its problem with no discoveries, higher expenditures, and a dearth of shallow prospects in stable jurisdictions. And that's bad news for you guys. And I just, when I got the same kind of talk from someone like me 40 years ago, it was a very different ending. You have a bright future. Society needs all these commodities going forward. Good for you. Go out and conquer the world. I wish I could give you that talk, but honestly, I can't. You're facing difficult times. Now, prophecies for fools. And if we look at one of those first graphs, if you recall them, the market is very cyclic. We're at a historic low for discoveries now. Who's to say it won't bounce back and come roaring back? Maybe it will. If you had this talk 10, 20, 30 years ago, I might say that's the case. But I think there might actually be a step change in the dynamics of exploration, both from the inventory point of accessible ore bodies that are economically discoverable and exploitable, and the number of jurisdictions you can work in. It's hard to go a month without seeing a government change from being pro-mining to anti-mining, capitalist to socialist, NGOs becoming more aggressive and proactive, environmental laws becoming so onerous that you don't even want to try. So with that, thank you so much for the time to give this presentation. I do apologize it wasn't more upbeat. It's fair to ask, actually, and I should state that if you were to ask me, would I do this again, knowing what I know now and what I've done, I'd say yes. For me, it's been a great career. I haven't gotten rich from it, but I haven't done very badly either. I'm quite content with my life. And it beat the heck out of sitting at a desk, making cold calls or looking at a computer. So for me personally, it was great. For you personally, going forward, that's a decision you'll need to make on your own. Thank you. Any questions? Stunned silence? Yeah, kind of expecting that. Lauren, am I on mute? The online audience wants to ask a question. I want to make sure.
To stop the screen share and pull up Zoom, if there are any chat questions.
Could you render some assistance on
Yeah,
that, being a cognitively challenged senior citizen?
It's okay. I do help dregs out quite a bit.
Yeah, you have experience in this matter.
Perfect. All right. Where the chat is.
Hey, I have a question or a comment. If you can hear me,
Larry,
Okay.
you're muted or we can't
It's
hear you.
Larry.
is Larry.
Oh, we
That's
can't,
right.
we can't hear Larry. I don't think. we
You
can.
aren't hearing me. Let's
maybe we
see.
can.
What do we do here every time we get these problems? Oh, here we go. Is
Yes,
Thanks, Larry. Repeat.
that working?
yes,
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
our bad.
To comment, always appreciate the smiling face of our co-host or whatever.
Thanks, Larry.
Anyway, you're doing a lot for us, and this was a great talk. I just wanted to say to the undergraduates who maybe are just starting into geology, and I can't tell how many of them are there. I guess you've got a pretty good crowd there, LJ.
We had started out with about 10, I think. And some have walked out, not surprisingly. I think they're changing their majors.
Well, maybe they got a math test coming, but if you have a bunch who are undergraduates who maybe are just starting, I just think back to when I was in high school and growing up in the West and the East as well. Suddenly my grandmother in LA said, hey, well, let's go down to Tijuana just drive down there. We'll drive down there during the morning. We'll come back in the afternoon. And I went down there. I must have been a junior in high school, first time out of the country. I said, geez, this is a dump. This is horrible. And I get approached by people with all kinds of things they wanted to vend to me. And would I like to see a dog and pony show? I didn't know what that meant, but would I like to meet a young boy or whatever? And all this stuff. I don't ever want to work outside the country. I was going to be an electrical engineer anyway at that time. And it took a few years. I got to college and geology just became much more fascinating than all the math courses I was struggling through to be a double E. And I got into geology, but it was, well, the people I knew did it in country, and some of them were in oil, and they got fired more often than the mining people, and I liked hard rock. So anyway, I now have no regrets, but here and there I had to make decisions. I went to places and I said, well, this isn't really nice, or somebody hasn't really told me all about it. But boy, it's just worked out very well. Maybe I've been lucky. I've certainly had some of the experiences that you talk about, LJ, and some unpleasant moments of why am I here, working for consulting people who were definitely con jobs, and some very good people. And the biggest thing I found is most developing country people are just really good people. A lot of them give you the shirt off their back, and they tend to know where there's bad people, and they'll tell you. So I'd say if you like this, you're an undergraduate just starting, don't be too afraid of all this. It's going to be different in every place, and certainly there's a few places that have gotten a lot worse than when I was there. But I think LJ's assessment of it is pretty good. And The only guns I've had pointed at me 5 times were in the United States when I was on somebody's property who didn't think I should be there. They didn't shoot at me though. Anyway, I think it's a great opportunity if you like this kind of thing. But if you just want to stay in an office, there are such jobs in the government. There are such jobs in mining geology, but that's not what I want to do. And I'm glad I didn't. So thank you.
LJ, are your view graphs going to be available? The first part of your talk had some very informative view graphs I'd like to look at more closely.
Let's see if I can get that for you.
I'm sorry, say again.
Yeah,
Okay.
start at the beginning and tell me when to stop.
So I'll just send you an email. That work?
Yes, I think. Well, might be better to give me one verbally. I don't know if I can easily and quickly get to my own email account as I'm set up here, not using my own computer.
Uh-huh.
Like you're saying, you can just email you later.
Yeah, but it'd be better if we could address this in real time with the whole audience so we can share whatever his observations are.
Well, I do have your email address, I think.
Well, let's see, I can try to get online here, but could you just briefly ask verbally what the question is? And
Well, there are a number of view graphs at the front end of your presentation. They're very informative.
yes, can you see that graph or are we off Zoom now, Lauren?
Oh, you're not screen sharing anymore.
Oh,
You
okay.
just wanted the.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you just want.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can mail you this talk. I'd be happy to do that if you'd like.
Yeah, seems simplest if I just ping you with an email.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. I thought you wanted to discuss one of the graphs
All right.
live. Yeah, I think it's really important that, we take an outside in look at the business as a whole and have a very gimlet eye. How much things are costing and yes.
Do you think that the need for like green metals could cause a bit of a fix? And then the UK, they're looking at potentially mining lithium restrictions for that.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually meant to segue into that. And this is part of this transformational step change we're seeing in the global economy. And that's the elephant in the room, is a net zero carbon economy going forward. How are we going to do that? That's a whole topic by itself. Frankly, I think it's physically impossible to mine all the metals we need to meet these aspirational goals set by our politicians. But yeah, prices of commodities might go up. Governments might incentivize companies, various places to look for these things. And it might make the next big boom in mineral exploration. I'm not quite so sanguine about it because in first world jurisdictions, I just listened to a talk from the EU a couple of days ago. I forget the title of it, but that doesn't matter. The EU, like the United States, is difficult to build a mine here, and it's getting worse all the time. So where are you going to get these metals? Lithium, cobalt, nickel. And, well, in the second place, a lot of those commodities aren't found in great abundance in North or South or North of America or Europe. So now you're dealing with third world, second world jurisdictions that might be kleptocracies. They might not want you there. Another foreign power, who will go unnamed, might sew up all the resources in that country through generous donations, let's say, to political parties. There's a lot of unknowns going forward there. So yes, maybe that could happen. But there's going to be some big challenges along that road.
Art says very grim and existential.
I'm glad I hit my marks.
It's not- we feel that the title of the talk should have been Trust No One.
Yeah, it should have been a subtitle perhaps, yes.
Hey, LJ, it's Mary Little.
Hey, Mary.
Hi. Yeah, I was, I've got a brand new laptop and it calls me owner, so nobody really saw it was me. But I just wanted to add a few words because
Mary, could you turn up your speaker
Oh,
a bit,
no,
please?
you should
can
probably
I turn up my speaker?
Again, cognitive moment.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think we're okay, Mary. We'll just turn you
Okay.
up over here.
Okay, yeah, I
all
just wanted to add a few words because if there if women listening to your talk, they may find that there's some additional items or some differences as well. Just because gender differences are treated differently in various countries. But overall, particularly the safety issues that you discussed in great detail are the same. You know, just keep your wits about you, be smart, and sort of listen to what the locals tell you as well. Very important. Now, I was really fortunate. I lived abroad and worked abroad for almost 15 years. Working mostly with major companies, you know, Newmont, Cypress, Western Mining, and then with my own company as well. And, you know, if you can acclimate to the local culture, learn some of the language, make some friends, and sort of integrate, then it goes a long way because they will watch out for you too. If you're in a very remote location, you know, that you need to have a good feeling for the people you're with. You always do in any case. But I think it's very important to learn about the culture. If you're not here in the United States or North America and are comfortable environment, then you need to learn about the culture and you know, see how you're going to fit in when you execute your program. And that's actually in addition to everything else you have to do about working with the government and the local framework also. So I think you hit a lot of points on the head. And you know, I've woken up before in places where I've said to myself, I cannot believe they pay me to do this. It's just so great. And, you know, I've also, you know, been in situations that were a little bit shaky, you know, and you just have to use a lot of judgment when you're there. So good job, LJ.
Thank you, Mary. Those were excellent points. I'm really glad you raised them because I had in my expanded version of notes for this talk, which ran to 28 pages, something about women and gender issues. And I just really couldn't shoehorn it in, but I'll expound on it now a bit, building on what you said. There was one place we worked where rape was a real serious concern in that particular culture. And we really had to take extra precautions for the females in the camp. Other jurisdictions, it's not like the US, it's not politically correct. And so there are sometimes issues, but not as bad as you'd normally think. And women bring a lot to a camp or to an exploration project on a number of fronts. And this is, you know, there's a lot more women in mining now and exploration than there were when I started, when there were basically zero. One thing they really bring is their more empathic view of the world and better communicative skills than a lot of guys. And so in many camps, the female technical staff, geologists, would make friends in the village and chat with people, and they would find out things that I would never find out otherwise. So that was really invaluable just from getting along with the locals. And they sometimes turn out to be better geologists and workers than the men, who tended to drink beer and chase girls more than they did geology sometimes. So, yeah, there's a place for women here. They do have their own special risks, but in most cases they're manageable and they make the team better and stronger.
I agree with all of those points. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the online participants? Okay, well, with that, I will say thank you all for attending. It's been a pleasure and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, LJ.